Hello, I'm David Frost, one of the co-directors of HertsCam. I'm here to introduce a short video in which I interviewed Paul Barnett just a few years ago about his practice as a school leader and how the Leadership for Learning project that we were both involved in 2002 to 2006 has been enacted in the way that he has carried out his leadership role at Barnwell School. Thank you. I'm talking with Paul Barnett, who until recently was Deputy Head Teacher at Barnwell School, which is in the new town of Stevenage in Hertfordshire. Paul, when I interviewed you in 2004, you talked about your commitment to certain principles and how these resonated with LFL values. Can you tell us about the sort of principles that you were referring to then?
The key principles that always resonated for me around centering learning at the heart of the school's life was so important. So developing that climate and that culture of learning, the dialogue of learning, embedding that from senior leaders through the school to the life of the students, involving parents, governors, the whole community, but a community that saw learning as its reason for being.
And leadership?
Well, the key thing for me regarding the leadership of the school was always that it was going to be, needed to be, an inclusive style of leadership, that it was a democratic process that involved all of the stakeholders. And I think in terms of developing the culture in that school, it was so important that people understood those values, understood the journey, shared the experience. The key of non-positional leadership was the driver to saying that we're all involved, we are all leaders in the community. Regardless of your role or position, we want you to exercise your leadership, to be risk takers, and to learn and to share the learning and have that dialogue across the community about how we were going to engage with our journey of school improvement.
You've been involved with the HertsCam network since you did your Masters with us 15 years ago, something like that. Why did you remain involved with HertsCam? Because you're part of the tutor team and have been for some time. How has that helped you to do what you wanted to do, your relationship with HertsCam?
It was absolutely transformational for me, joining HertsCam, studying on the Masters, and hearing stories of people who were engaged with learning in a way that I knew was the right thing to do. So it was a real empowerment to find other people who were involved in that sort of learning process. The key elements for me that have held me dear to that are always value driven, and the values that mean that students are important. We're not chasing grades as our only purpose in life. That love of learning and the desire to understand learning and help students become better learners, but as a community as well, to look at colleagues, how they learn and their own development. And the principles, the LFL principles actually, that were embedded in HertsCam, that valued everybody's contribution. From the very start, you know, the key element of student voice, when other people weren't really talking about student voice in the same way, that had meaning, that wasn't a tokenistic element, but it was purely about involving everybody in that community. And those principles I've held dear to through my career in the many years that have passed, and they've been the driver in the school. They have helped shape the school, and are reflected in and around the school, from displays to conversations, to relationships, to design, building design where we had the potential to do things differently. Then we would always seek to go back to the principles and those values as to why we were making the decisions we made.
You were involved with the Carpe Vitam LFL project in 2003 and 5, and then subsequently when we set up the International Teacher Leadership Initiative. You travelled with us all over the world in those projects. not everybody, not all teachers see international connection as being valuable. So why did you see it as worthwhile? And I assume you did. But in what way did you see it as worthwhile?
Oh, it was an absolute joy, and it has been in terms of understanding other people's contexts, working with colleagues, teacher colleagues, other educational professionals, in really challenging circumstances often, post-war difficulties and torn communities, and rebuilding the lives of families and schools and communities, and the determination and the commitment of those colleagues, and feeling that they were interested in what we had to say, and in some small way that we were able to make a contribution to developing those seeds of growth in those communities. It was exceptional, and we learned so much. It wasn't it wasn't an empire model of taking something and thinking that you were the answer, but it was a sharing of ideas, and we brought back so many ideas, and teachers being so creative, and thinking about risk taking, but in a completely different context where challenges were so tough, and it was so empowering and so uplifting, and the relationships that we forged as well that have stood the test of time. But it was a real joy, and I think that anybody who is limited by their own school, I've heard tales of schools where language of head teachers pulling up the drawbridge because they're not interested in what's going on outside of their school. It's all about the focus inside and raising grades, to the detriment of the sustainable growth of that school. And I think where Barnwell was able to benefit from the likes of Emma and myself travelling was that we always came back with fresh impetus, fresh ideas, and new challenges for ourselves. So it's been fantastic.
Finally, I'm thinking about the particular nature of Barnwell School and the community it serves, and I'm thinking of an article that Andy Hargreaves wrote some years ago, which he called Professional Learning Communities and Performance Training Sects, the Emerging Apartheid of School Improvement. He was arguing that schools that are deemed to be successful because they've got high levels of measured attainment, they find it much easier to build the sort of professional culture that's favourable to innovation and development. Barnwell, of course, has been serving a disadvantaged community, and I imagine that's made it particularly difficult to try to sustain those values and principles that you've just been talking about. How have you managed to navigate your way through that, the tension of being in that kind of school where, Ofsted and everything else are expecting just to see better test results?
That has been a challenge, and Ofsted always want to see improving performance as their biggest indicator, but we've always been able to illustrate our commitment to that journey through focusing on learning, and we've always, regardless of the attainment outcomes, always been able to point to the achievements that students have made and that their colleagues have made in terms of developing the skills of teaching and learning. So that was always stood out as something worthy of praise. It's always a journey, but the community grew and grew in number and strength. The desire to engage with additional learning of colleagues, 70 people on a one-year TLDW HertsCam project, 20 on a master's programme. So highly motivated colleagues, which absolutely contributed to a stable staffing. So in the circumstances we were in, when other schools were suffering greatly from transient staffing, we were able to have a commitment from our staffing and create the climate where people wanted to stay and learn and make that contribution. And the results have always been on that upward trajectory. So it's one of those things that I think has helped us be the school that we are, by focusing on the right principles, the right values. And whoever's come in, whilst they might criticise outcomes, they will always applaud the way that we've engaged with our journey.
Thank you.